For our first intermission this afternoon, Father Owen Lee will continue his survey of Wagner's Ring cycle, centering his discussion on Siegfried. Father Lee will illustrate his remarks with excerpts from the opera played on the Yamaha. Father Lee.
Thank you, Peter Allen. The birth of the hero of today's opera was solemnly foretold in the closing measures of the broadcast last week, when the father god Wotan encircled his slumbering Valkyrie daughter in a ring of fire. But that Valkyrie daughter, Brynhilde, always saw more deeply into her father than he could himself. She said that she was his will, and seemed in some strange way to see with the eye that he had lost. She must have known before he did that that hero would come. And in fact, it was she who first proclaimed the birth of the hero, even before her father thought of it, in this famous theme. Today we meet that new hero with that famous theme. To find him, Wagner moved farther and farther back in his imagination. He wanted to conjure up primitive man in the springtime of the world, and his excitement mounted as his perception grew. He said of the human specimen that began to emerge in his verses, "I could see each throbbing of his pulses, each effort of his muscles as he moved. I saw the archetype of man himself." Young Siegfried, as today's opera was first called, is about the passage out of childhood. It traces the hero's progress from boy to man, and for the first time, Wagner combines myth, which is in the main pessimistic and reflects an adult psychology, with fairy tales, which deal optimistically with the problems of children. Young Siegfried may be almost full-grown as his opera begins, but emotionally he is still a child, companioned only by a dwarf, that fairy tale symbol of arrested psychic growth. The lonely boy desperately needs other companionship. When he first appears, he tells us he has been wandering in the forest, sounding his horn in the hope that some real friend would appear. As if in answer, a bear came charging out of the trees, and the boy hit on the idea of using this new companion to force the dwarf, Mima, to give him the knowledge he needs, and especially the sword he needs, notum means need, to become a man. Perhaps you were shocked when, in Act 1, you heard young Siegfried sick the bear on the helpless Mima. But remember that the boy has never been taught gentler ways. He has learned just this much, that threatening Mima is the only way he can learn anything more. We ought not to censure, but to pity him. He is thirsting for knowledge, hungry for love, and though he doesn't know it, he is in mortal danger. Mima has kept him from all human relationships and raised him for one purpose only, to slay the dragon that guards the ring. Once that is done, Mima plans to do what he intended from the start: kill the boy, take the ring, and rule the world. Small wonder the boy befriends animals, birds, and fishes for the little knowledge and love they can give him. Recall how T.H. White, drawing on mythic sources, had young King Arthur live with fishes, birds, and badgers to learn from them. Recall how Walt Disney, with intuitive insight, gave Snow White a family of forest creatures for companion protectors as she waited amid the dwarfs for her awakening to maturity. Recall how Luke Skywalker learned his skills in the forest from the dwarf Yoda and came to maturity when he discovered his true parentage. More than anything, young Siegfried needs to know who his father and mother are. Mima, to keep him ignorant, insists that he is the boy's father and mother both. Perhaps Dr. Mima knows that a boy can become a man only when, psychologically, he has become his father and his mother. For when Siegfried learns something of his true father and mother, he is able at last to spring into action, to forge his own sword from the pieces left by his father and saved by his mother, and begin his passage out of childhood. Now, as is the rule with both hero myths and fairy tales, all of this depicts psychological maturing. It is even possible to think of it as taking place within the psyche of any one of us who, like a child, listens. At Bayreuth, Wagner's grandson set Act I of Siegfried in the dark inside of a human brain. A century before, Wagner himself, as he darkened his auditorium, began Siegfried with a motif first identified as purposeful brooding. In the first act of Siegfried, as in much of The Ring, we are probing the human soul. 20th century psychiatry, with evidence from dreams, can provide meanings for everything we have seen in Act I. The forest is the unconscious, the horn, the impulse towards consciousness, the dwarf, an obstacle to growth, the bear, psychic energy summoned in need, the sword made anew from shattered pieces, the assimilation of a lost father and mother, the longed-for ring, mastery over all the forces of the psyche. We may or may not find these Freudian explanations convincing, but Wagner's orchestra keeps compelling us to ask what the images mean. The music, said Thomas Mann in a famous essay, seems to shoot up like a geyser from the pre-civilized bedrock depths of myth. What is it, Mann asks, that elevates Wagner's work so far above the intellectual level of all previous forms of musical drama? Two forces have combined, he answers, psychology and myth. Yes, long before Freud and Jung discovered that psychology and myth illuminated each other, Wagner had intuited and exploited their interrelation. His contemporaries saw myth mostly as primitive science. It was man's first way of explaining the mysterious world around him. Wagner saw myth also as primitive psychology. It was man's first way of understanding the still more mysterious world deep within him. So, on first hearing, The Ring seems to be about the cosmos, the elemental struggle of earth, air, fire, and water. But as we listen more, it is impossible not to think that the human soul is the real landscape on which the four dramas of The Ring are enacted. Myth has always said as much about the psyche as about the cosmos. And here is the astonishing thing about myth, and Wagner realizes it in today's opera. Myth tells us that the patterns of the psyche within are identical with those of the cosmos without. For example, in the act we've just heard, when Wotan and Mima question one another, Mima asks about the three parts of the cosmos which Freud has since found in the psyche and called the id, the ego, and the superego. And Wotan, in turn, asks the three questions most important to Siegfried's psychological growth. Who are his parents? What is his sword? How are the fragmented pieces of his past to be forged for his future? Wagner also introduced into the Siegfried myths a wholly new element, the motif of the child learning fear. It was intuition that made him do this. The folk tale of the boy who sets out to learn fear, familiar to him from the Brothers Grimm, fastened onto him and wouldn't let him go till he put it into his text. He has Mime attempt to frighten Siegfried with the most fearful thing imaginable, the sound and the sight of the dragon's fire swirling through the forest. Siegfried doesn't fear any of that at all. But then, as Wagner's omniscient orchestra describes the fire-breathing dragon, something startling happens. Deep down in the depths of the music, says Thomas Mann, there is a shadowy hint of the thing that will teach him fear, a reminiscence of the sleep-banished maiden of whom Siegfried knows nothing, but whom he is destined to waken. Wagner here anticipates what contemporary writers on the psychology of myth have since discovered, that the myth of the hero describes the psychological maturing of the adolescent male, and that devouring monsters in the hero myth represent something precisely identifiable in the male psyche, namely, the frightening aspect of the feminine. The anima, as Jung called the male's inner feminine, is potentially destructive, potentially creative. The maturing male must defeat its dangerous side and release its creative potential. So the medieval knight, when he slays his dragon, frees a maiden and marries her. Wagner saw the psychological meaning of this long before we did, and he hid the theme of the slumbering feminine deep within his fear-inducing dragon music. No scene in The Ring is richer in these interpenetrations of music, myth, and psychology than the forest murmurs we shall soon hear in Act 2. Siegfried lies alone beneath forest trees which allow only intermittent shafts of morning light to appear, waiting for the moment when, with his horn, he can summon up the second companion to contribute to his maturing, the dragon. Just as modern psychology would have it, his thoughts turn to the feminine, to the mother he has never known. Subtly, gradually, the music recreates in this leafy enclosure the watery world in which the ring began. The murmuring of the Siegfried trees, sounds like the rippling of the Rheingold waves. The cry of the forest in Siegfried. Echoes the cry of the water creatures in Rheingold. And a forest bird in Siegfried. In tones almost note for note, the Rhine Maiden's song, Wander, Wave, Waft to the Cradle. The first pages of The Ring are a mother's cradle song for the world at birth, and the return of those feminine motifs at this midpoint in the ring implies that the world, once alive with pristine innocence, now has a hero, Siegfried, who can make it new again. The purpose of a hero, Hegel had said, is to bring a new world into existence. So, in Act 3, the young hero encounters the father figure. Wotan wears his hat across his face as he goes against the wind. He sees the eye he forfeited long ago now staring back at him from the boy's face. He willingly holds his ash tree spear aloft so that the sword it once shattered may now, reforged by the son of his son, smash it in turn. Like the myths where Oedipus and Jason and Perseus encounter and defeat the father, this scene between Siegfried and Wotan depicts the young male's assertion of independence as he moves past the father of his father to find himself, or more technically, his self. Today's most famous and suggestive symbol is the circle of fire around the slumbering Brünnhilde. That flaming barrier symbolizes the fear the hero must experience in order to love, and the illumination which love will bring him. It means something, too, for the heroine. It protects her as the wall of thorns protected Sleeping Beauty from sexual awakening before she is ready for it. Siegfried passes through the fire, sounding his horn once again to summon up a companion, and at last his longing for love is fulfilled, for at last he finds a companion to teach him fear. His frightened shout, "This is no man," as he removes her warrior breastplate, is as psychologically right as her awakening at his kiss to greet not him alone, but all the world. The response to love is life's complete answer to the child's wondering what the world means. The love duet that follows is surely the strangest of all love duets in opera. For one thing, it completes a pattern in this opera that is also found in modern psychology. Carl Jung tells us that the male achieves wholeness only when he has faced three archetypal forces, the shadow, the anima, and the wise old man, and then integrated these experiences in some circular centripetal pattern which symbolizes his self. In the course of today's opera, the hero encounters, in correct Jungian order, Mime, the shadow, the dragon, the anima, Wotan, the wise old man, and in the circle of fire, Brünnhilde, who tells him astonishingly, "I am yourself." And now it is Brünnhilde who must face fear. She has been reduced to mortal state and is trembling on the brink of surrender to human love. When her fear is at its height, Wagner writes in his manuscript, a beautiful idea occurs to her, and he has his orchestra intone the main melody of his separately composed Siegfried Idyll. The text indicates that the beautiful idea is the romantic notion developed by Goethe and always evolving in Wagner's mind that the ewig Weibliche, the eternal feminine, will lead the aspiring masculine onwards. As the duet hurries to its end, Brünnhilde's imagery streaming through the text is the feminine symbol, water. Siegfried's is the masculine, fire. Very strangely for a love duet, the two lovers foresee the impending destruction of the world through fire and water and laugh with joy. As we said last week, The world will be transformed at the end of the ring, and these two are the ones who will accomplish that transformation. Each of them sees with the lost eye of Wotan. Each is an embodiment of his will. They know that it is now Wotan's will that his world of Villa be transformed into something new. Siegfried is a pioneer's journey into areas drama had never before attempted, and psychology was only beginning to become aware of. Pioneering efforts are never completely successful. When he'd completed Act II of Siegfried, Wagner abandoned his Ring for almost 12 years and turned to write Tristan and Die Meistersinger. There were practical reasons for his doing this, but he likely felt as well that the Ring was becoming something even he couldn't understand. But as the Ring continues to be performed all over the world, our understanding of Siegfried will surely grow. Bruno Bettelheim, in his book on fairy tales, tells us why children ask to hear the same stories over and over, in the dark, with their imaginations alerted. Only by degrees can they absorb the wisdom the tales have to give. We too are coming by degrees to see what wisdom lies in the Ring. Wagner himself only gradually came to see that his intuitive musical myth was describing not a social and political, but a psychological and metaphysical reality. It was asking, who am I? Where did I come from? What is the meaning of life? What is the world? Those are not the revolutionaries' questions or the politicians'. They are the philosophers' questions, and also the child's. That, surely, is one reason why the myth-maker of Bayreuth was the first of all composers to darken his theater as he told his stories.
Thank you, Father Lee.